20 years, Jeffrey Epstein avoided any serious punishment for abusing young girls. A lot of them, apparently. Many, many, many. Even though his behavior was an open secret, he got away with it because he was affluent and he had many powerful friends like Bill Clinton. Even after his suicide, we're still uncovering what went on. We still only know a fraction of it, but here's part of what we know. Prince Andrew, a member, of course, of the British royal family, was very close to Epstein during the period where he was abusing underage girls. Now, over the weekend, the prince gave a thoroughly bizarre interview, something you really have to see to believe, to the BBC, in which, among other things, he summarized Epstein's decades of abuse, and we're quoting now, as unbecoming.
Do I regret the fact that he has quite obviously conducted himself in a manner unbecoming? Yes.
Unbecoming? He was a sex offender.
Yeah, but I'm sorry, I'm being polite.
As soon as we're off the air and I go to YouTube, as soon as Sean's done, at some point, go to YouTube and watch the whole thing. It's like unbelievable. The prince also said he did not regret being close to Epstein. Watch.
Do you regret that trip?
Yes.
Do you regret the whole friendship with Epstein?
Still not. And the reason being is that the people that I met and the opportunities that I was given to learn, either by him or because of him.
There was a lot of learning, a lot of teaching going on at Jeffrey Epstein's house, particularly on the island. Well, even though photographs show the prince with his arms around the waist of an Epstein accuser, the prince says it wasn't him, it was probably faked.
Nobody can prove whether or not that photograph has been doctored, but I don't recollect that photograph ever being taken.
And you don't recollect having your hand round her waist?
No.
Well, one of the reasons that Prince Andrew has avoided answering the most basic questions for so long, of course, is because of the behavior of the news media, very much including ABC News in this country. They suppressed reporting into the Epstein scandal, apparently under pressure from the royal family. Now, just yesterday, House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy sent a letter to ABC News demanding answers in this story. Elizabeth Wagmeister has been following this from the beginning. She's a senior Variety correspondent at Variety, and she joins us tonight. So, Elizabeth, thanks for coming on. What does this letter from the House Minority Leader say?
He is demanding answers from ABC. So he said, why did you not air this interview? Which Amy Robach, she, of course, was caught on a hot mic. We spoke about that a few weeks ago, Tucker, where she said that she had an accuser of Jeffrey Epstein. She said she had all the goods. It was ready for air. Of course, at the time, ABC said it was not ready for air. So in this letter, he's asking, why was this hidden? And will you send this interview to Congress so that we can see it? He's asking for all of the answers because there's many, many questions. And he even goes as far to say that over the years since this interview was conducted, that if the interview did air, it could have possibly prevented more underage women from being sexually trafficked.
This is a major development. I think. Has ABC responded?
They have not. So I reached out to ABC, Tucker. They are declining comment. But what I will tell you, because, of course, at the time when Amy Robach's video leaked, ABC said it was not ready for air. And they also pointed out we have not shied away from covering the Jeffrey Epstein saga. Well, I have to tell you this morning, of course, I tuned in to Good Morning America. They did cover the Prince Andrew interview at length. They spent about 10 minutes on it. So they weren't shying away from covering that now, which I think was a very clear, obvious step to say, look, we are covering it.
Did they suggest there was any conflict that one of their anchors once ate at Jeffrey Epstein's house? Have they addressed that on the air?
They have not addressed it on the air. Also, this morning, Amy Robach, she was not the one to present the story. I guess that could have been a little awkward, But, Tucker, I want to get back to Prince Andrew's interview. You were just going through some of the most bizarre moments, which it was one after the other. It's perplexing how this even happened. The interview actually occurred in Buckingham Palace, which signals that the Queen did approve this interview. It seems like he went through absolutely no coaching. He had no empathy. He didn't even mention any of the victims. One of the most bizarre parts, though, is when he said that he has a medical condition where he cannot sweat because the victim had mentioned in many of her accusations, she said that at one point she was dancing at a nightclub with him in London and that he was sweating. So he's going as far to come up with these bizarre excuses. Now, another thing that you brought up, he said that he doesn't even know this woman, and then of course there's that infamous photo with his arm around her. He says it's photoshopped. I mean, it's like he's hanging out with Lori Loughlin or something. It's bizarre what he's been saying.
Can't sweat. He has a medical condition. So that's what we've learned at the BBC. Again, treat yourself. It's on our Facebook page, our viewers who want to see the rest of it. Elizabeth, thanks so much for that.
Thank you, Tucker.
Well, there is an investigation into how exactly Jeffrey Epstein died while in custody in Manhattan prison. According to reports, federal charges are imminent against the guards who are supposed to be guarding Jeffrey Epstein. Reportedly, the guards have already declined a plea deal offer. Ed Gavin is a former NYPD officer, now works as a private investigator, and joins us today. Ed, thanks so much for coming on. So these guards, I mean, even the mayor of New York, who I think is usually kind of out of it, Bill de Blasio, weighed in and seemed to kind of attack these guards. Tell us what charges they may be facing and what it means they declined a plea deal.
Well, if they're facing charges, it would be for failing to efficiently perform their duties. As correction officers, they're required to make tours at frequent intervals, I believe in the special housing area, every half hour. But it could be a fishing expedition on the part of the feds, too, because I think if they had enough evidence to make the arrest, they probably would have collared these officers already. And if their attorneys are telling them not to take the plea deal, there's got to be something more to it. Now, if the cameras weren't working, that's to their advantage. I mean, they can say, look, we made our tours every half hour. The cameras aren't working, unless they're going to interview inmates, and they're going to take the words of inmates. And if the inmates can say, well, the officers were sleeping, or the officers were making their required tours of inspection, it all depends on what the investigation shows.
Very high-profile prisoner whose life has apparently been threatened. Before the purported suicide, he was quoted as saying he feared for his life. How strange is it, in your view, that there were no cameras trained on his cell or in the hallway outside?
Well, it's patently outrageous. I mean, you have a special housing area, and he's arguably probably the most high-profile pretrial detainee in federal BOP history. Now, I mean, the feds messed this up from the onset. I mean, initially, this individual, Mr. Epstein, was placed in a cell with Nicholas Tartaglione, who's a former Briarcliff Manor police officer who was charged in a quadruple murder. He was in protective custody as a police officer. He was taken out of protective custody, and he immediately received a wanton gratuitous beating to the point where they had to put a metal plate in his orbital. So why would you put Jeffrey Epstein in a cell with this guy? You know, I mean, Jeffrey Epstein, for all intents and purposes, is a sex offender. He's a second-time offender, and you're going to put him in a cell with this guy? That didn't make any sense. And then to take him off of suicide watch, that doesn't make any sense at all. What he should have done, what should have happened is he should have been taken to a municipal hospital like Bellevue, where he could have been evaluated by a psychiatrist. And that didn't happen. So what do? They put him in a cell by himself, okay? And they put him on a floor with a correction officer who's not even a certified correction officer. And then you have Michael Baden, a world-renowned pathologist. He comes along, he looks at Jeffrey Epstein, he does his own independent autopsy, and he's been doing this for 50 years, he's done over 20,000 autopsies. And Michael Baden determines that the injuries that Jeffrey Epstein sustained are not consistent with suicide by hanging, but rather suicide by strangulation. So the only thing that I can think that might have happened is maybe the officers weren't doing their jobs, maybe they were sleeping, maybe unknown individuals, inmates, officers, civilians, I don't know, went into Jeffrey Epstein's cell, strangled him, and then put a ligature around his neck to make it seem like he was hung, like there was a hanging. I mean, what else could possibly have gone wrong there?
Under normal circumstances, I would say, Ed, that's crazy, but under these circumstances, I'm not going to say that because it's clearly not crazy. Ed, thanks so much for coming on tonight. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Roger Stone was convicted in federal court last week on 7 felony charges stemming from the since-closed Russia collusion investigation. Stone's main crime was lying to Congress about who he had or had not spoken to about Russia. By the time Stone's trial began in Washington, the larger scandal that ensnared him had long been debunked. Nobody was talking about WikiLeaks anymore. Nobody cared. And yet prosecutors continued zealously as if it were still 2017. For lying about something that is now officially irrelevant, They argue that Roger Stone should spend up to 50 years in prison, effectively the rest of his natural life. Now, at the very moment prosecutors were making that case that Stone's misstatements ought to be a death penalty offense, Congressman Adam Schiff was busy lying to the rest of us about new things, some of which actually mattered. Schiff didn't seem worried about his lying. He knew he would never be prosecuted for it. In Washington, dishonesty is strictly a one-way offense. Yet despite the obvious irony of all of this, Roger Stone was convicted anyway. An official Washington cheered. "Rot in hell," they screamed on Twitter, oblivious to karma, which, by the way, is real. What's interesting about the response to Stone's case, both from federal prosecutors and from the conventional opinion makers on television, is how much harsher and more outraged it was than anything that greeted convicted child molester Jeffrey Epstein. Do you think George Stephanopoulos would even consider having dinner at Roger Stone's house? Well, of course not. That would be immoral. FBI officials apparently agree with that. You'll remember what happened when Roger Stone was arrested earlier this year. Dozens of federal agents with automatic weapons, armored vehicles, and a helicopter descended on his home in a middle-class part of Fort Lauderdale and rousted the 66-year-old and his wife from bed at rifle point. And just to make sure the event inflicted maximum humiliation, the feds tipped off CNN, which was there to capture the whole thing live, which they did. That's how our government treated a man facing perjury charges. These people are sick. Now, Jeffrey Epstein, by contrast, was accused of molesting at least 34 separate underage girls. How was he arrested? Actually, that's a trick question. He wasn't arrested. According to the New York Times account, prosecutors called Jeffrey Epstein's lawyer and politely asked him to turn himself in, which Epstein politely did. Nobody tipped off CNN. In fact, just the opposite happened. Authorities tried to keep the whole thing secret in order to preserve Jeffrey Epstein's dignity. One prosecutor wrote to Epstein's attorney, Jay Lefkowitz, assuring him that in order to, quote, avoid the press, she could, quote, file the charge in district court in Miami, which will hopefully cut the press coverage significantly, end quote. Now that's pretty thoughtful treatment for a child molester. Ultimately, Epstein got a plea deal in which all federal charges against him were dropped, all of them. The arrangement was kept secret from Epstein's victims, so they wouldn't be able to complain about it or contest that agreement in court. Epstein received just 18 months. But instead of being sent to state prison like most sex offenders in Florida, he served his term in a private wing of the Palm Beach County Stockade. That was a massive improvement over ordinary lockup. But even that wasn't lenient enough for Jeffrey Epstein. After just 3.5 months in custody, Epstein was freed on work release. That means he was able to leave the grounds for 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. Now, sex offenders are not, by rule, allowed to get work release. They're ineligible for it. But authorities gave it to Epstein anyway. Apparently they liked him. The authorities don't like Roger Stone. He did something worse than molesting children. He mocked the people in charge and then helped get Donald Trump elected president. For that, Roger Stone is likely to die in prison. Just so you know the rules in this country.
Brand new speech from the Attorney General of the United States, Bill Barr. It is sending shockwaves through the Washington swamp for good reason. This is a preview of coming attractions. This is a powerful statement. Take a look.
Immediately after President Trump won election, opponents inaugurated what they called the resistance. And they rallied around an explicit strategy of using every tool and maneuver to sabotage the functioning of the executive branch and his administration. Now, resistance is the language used to describe insurgency against rule imposed by an occupying military power. This is a very dangerous and indeed incendiary notion to import into the politics of a democratic republic.
Make no mistake, this is a preview of coming attractions. Listening to the Attorney General of the United States Bar, well, it sounds pretty clear to me that he has discovered serious corruption, serious abuse of power in his investigation into the origins of the Russia witch hunt. And I would advise pay very close attention to what you just saw, because I see every indication there that the Attorney General fully, completely understands what is a clear and present danger to this country. If people that abuse power and people that are corrupt at the highest levels are not held accountable, if we don't have equal justice and application of our laws. We did have real corruption. There was real abuse of power, and it is clear to me, I don't think the Attorney General would make those remarks about the so-called resistance if he didn't have some pretty damning evidence at his disposal. I would predict in the coming months, if I were one of these deep state bureaucrats and operatives that was actively working against the President of the United States or a candidate or a transition team, and frankly against the country, I'd be very worried tonight. Because when the Attorney General compares you to the insurgency, I would watch out, because probably, I believe, something major is about to happen, and it won't be good for deep state operatives. Everything we have reported on this show, we have been 100% accurate on. The Attorney General finishes his investigation, his search for the truth and justice and real investigation. Yeah, there's still that other BS witch trial taking place on Capitol Hill, known as the Schiff Show. We're now in week 2 of this idiotic public charade. Even some Democrats are smart enough to see through this and are not pleased with what is taking place. One Democratic congressman from New Jersey even comparing this bizarre inquiry to what goes on in third world countries. It's kind of an understatement. Let's take a look.
This has nothing to do whether you like Donald Trump or don't like him or want to see him have a second term or win an election. This has to do with the institution of impeachment itself and not misusing it. There's a reason our founding fathers didn't really, many of them didn't want it in the Constitution and debated and battled back and forth whether it should be in the Constitution. It was more like what you would see in Europe or more like what you would see in oligarchies or what we now call third world nations.
Yeah.
People make the decisions in America. People vote. We have elections.
Yeah, a lot of people see this for what it is. 3 never-ending years of a Schiff show. Anyone with a functioning brain, you shouldn't be livid. You should see what they're doing to this country. How do we get to this point? Well, most of the congressman's Democratic colleagues, you know, to be a Democrat or a part of the mob and the media, you have to lose contact with all truth, logic, intellectual sensibility, common sense, and basic fairness. Instead, we've noticed something very bizarre has emerged. You got the Democrats, radical as they are, the media mob, they are right in front of our very eyes. They have sort of bifurcated their brains, and to be where they are embracing breathtaking hypocrisy. It's like their brains are split completely in two, like a kind of psychotic rift from any truth or any reality. You got on the one side, they put blinders on. They'll completely ignore all real issues of corruption, of the Bidens. Oh, a real quid pro quo. In other words, zero experience Hunter Biden gets millions of dollars from a corrupt oil company. No background, no experience in Ukraine, oil, energy, nothing. Why? Because his daddy was vice president. Forget the video of Joe Biden, a real shakedown that he's bragging about with the country of Ukraine, takes $1 billion of your tax dollars to get a prosecutor in Ukraine fired who was investigating his zero experience son for the millions he's being paid for zero experience. You have to, if you're a Democrat, if you're part of this insanity in the mob today, you have to forget the State Department officials that were gravely concerned about all this misconduct. Well, no, we're not going to investigate that. Forget all that. Shut up and stop asking questions, says the reporter. Hear no evil, see no evil. No different than when the Democrats acted like, oh, they cared about Russian interference in our 2016 elections, but they never cared about the Hillary Clinton bought and paid for dirty Russian dossier that was unverifiable, and then used to spy on a presidential candidate, and then a transition team, and then a president of the United States. So while you're ignoring the Biden shakedown quid pro quo on the one side of your bifurcated brain without cause, well, then you accuse the president of an impeachable offense, of a quid pro quo, of bribery and extortion, or whatever word happens to be polling best on any given day, except unlike the Bidens, there is zero evidence of any misconduct. As a matter of fact, the transcript is exculpatory. But yet we got one witness after another, no first-hand knowledge, zero. All we get is, well, I don't know, somebody's cousin's uncle, grandfather's nephew, third cousin once said something. Does the transcript ever once talk about aid? No, not once. Did the Ukrainian president or any other Ukrainian official accuse the president feeling any pressure to do anything? Zero. Did they ever do anything? No, they did not. So when you move further, all the witnesses in this shit show they're dragging the country through, all of them, zero knowledge of anything. One, Ambassador Sondland testified, he's the only one that asked the president, what would you like in exchange for the aid? President, he said, answered repeatedly, he said, no, I don't want a quid pro quo. I just want to end the corruption. Oh, like the Ukrainians interfering in our 2016 election, which of course they're ignoring that too. And tomorrow we're going to hear from former senior national security official Tim Morrison. Now, behind closed doors, we have the testimony because they leaked it on a Saturday when they didn't think we were paying attention. He was actually on the president's phone call with Ukraine, and he testified and will tomorrow. President's call had no connection to his political interest in the upcoming election. He'll testify that he had no concerns the president was trying to use Ukraine to influence the upcoming race. He also said that while he saw no quid pro quo, he did believe the president was rightly worried about corruption in Ukraine. This is what Democrats want to nullify an election over. There is nothing here. That's the sick part of all of this. You got the Bidens. You're not getting the billion. Fire the prosecutor, you get the billion. You got 6 hours. Yeah, my son has no experience at all. I don't want you investigating him anymore. They'll rip this country apart. No crime, no quid pro quo. Nothing was ever done. The aid went to Ukraine and they did nothing. And also breaking tonight, Congressman Lee Zeldin, interesting comments he's making, calling for all upcoming hearings to be postponed because of apparently some recent closed-door testimony he believes is a game changer. But of course, the corrupt, coward, congenital liar, that guy, he actually was caught on tape colluding with a Russian, has yet to make that important transcript public. Where are all the transcripts? Where's the non-whistleblower, hearsay whistleblower? What contact did the hearsay whistleblower have with Schiff and Schiff's office, and what recommendations were made? When is Joe Biden going to explain using $1 billion U.S. tax dollars to fire the prosecutor investigating his zero-experienced son being paid millions? And meanwhile, a senior Security Council official at the White House, good, he's suing Politico for libel, accusing the magazine of lying about his involvement in matters surrounding Ukraine. The suit calls out a Politico reporter for acting in concert with, yes, the congenital liar Adam Schiff, who is, quote, a demagogue with an axe to grind against the president. We know that because he's lied to us about Trump-Russia interference for 3 years. So that's what this whole trial is about. This is not about truth. This is not about justice. This isn't even about fact-finding. Just the latest effort by Schiff and others and their friends in the mob and the media to undo an election they still cannot believe they lost. They've never accepted the results of the 2016 election, and ever since they have been out for revenge. Here's one point you must understand. This is bigger and deeper than just Donald Trump, who they obviously just hate. They also hate we, the people, you know, we smelly Walmart shoppers that believe in God and guns and our Bibles and religion, irredeemables. They want to send us a message. They're going to teach us a lesson and take back what they feel is rightfully theirs, because in their elitism, they think they're smarter. They look down on the people of this country that voted for Donald Trump because they know better than we do. The only solace in all of this that you should take tonight is in 351 days, we, the American people, you have the power to shock the world once again and put them back in their place and put an end to all of this madness. Here now, the author of the best-selling book, Witch Hunt, Fox News legal analyst Greg Jarrett. I was very interested in the Attorney General's comments. I do not believe an Attorney General of the United States of America, as esteemed as Bill Barr, would make those comments without any real knowledge behind it.
Oh, he has immense knowledge behind it because he's had access not just to the Inspector General's report, He knows exactly what John Durham is doing in his investigation. He called it the resistance. In my book, I call it the malignant force. Unelected, powerful officials operating in the shadows of secrecy to undermine the president, to pervert the rule of law, and to subvert the Constitution. It was going on in the Russia witch hunt, and now it's going on steroids in the Ukraine witch hunt. A chattering class of diplomats trafficking in nothing more than opinion and hearsay in order to invent a pretext to impeach the president. And Adam Schiff is at the helm of it all.
I just was told by my team, so apparently David Hale's testimony was just released a short time ago, and he says in the transcript it was his understanding that Pompeo called you to ask you what evidence you had of allegations regarding Yovanovitch. Greg, how many times do I have to say, we barely mentioned this woman?
I know.
Hard 4 times in passing. No, I never got a call from Secretary of State Pompeo or anybody else. Why would they lie about this? You know what?
I don't blame you. You are being smeared. Donald Trump has been smeared for the better part of 3 years, ever since he won the election.
I know nothing about this woman. Now I do. Oh, now I know a lot about her.
She is an irrelevant, immaterial, and in any court case would be an inadmissible witness.
Stop there. All of it would be inadmissible. Is there anything hearsay that gets admitted?
And if Mitch McConnell uses the federal rules of evidence, none of these people that we've heard from would be allowed to testify.
Chief Justice that decides that. Doesn't the Chief Justice decide?
No, the federal rules of evidence can be invoked by the Senate upon a majority vote. Actually, it could actually be done by Mitch McConnell himself. They set the rules for the trial. The Constitution is silent about what rules they can use. They don't even have to have a Chief Justice preside.
Could a Chief Justice ever not follow the federal rules of evidence?
You can bet that a Chief Justice would always follow the rules of evidence.
I would think that
But he would defer to what the Senate wants to do, and Mitch McConnell has said, we're going to use those rules. That means all of these people will not testify.
Amazing. That in the backdrop of all of this nonsense surrounding the Schiff show, well, we're still waiting on the results of 2 critically important investigations out of the DOJ. First, despite one infuriating delay after another, yes, now we might have a date certain of the Horowitz report on FISA abuse, because breaking tonight, Senator Lindsey Graham just announced that the Inspector General Horowitz will testify before his Senate committee about his findings on December 11th. That means we will likely get it the week before. Please don't drop it on a Friday. Give it to us on a Monday so we can absorb it and then go in next week so we have plenty of time to go through. I hear it's 500 or 600 pages. A lot of information. And meanwhile, as we mentioned at the top, the Attorney General is dropping some pretty big hints. His investigation into the origins of the Russia witch hunt is not coming up empty. And of course, Barr has been routinely trashed by the media mob for actually doing his job, searching for real truth. Joining us now with reaction, the author of Power Grab, Fox News contributor Jason Chaffetz, along with Fox News contributor Kimberly Strassel. All right, so you know Horowitz, Jason. That would tell me, if listening to Barr's comments and the announcement by Lindsey Graham tonight, now we have a date. It will be the first week of December. That's what it sounds like.
The Attorney General has had this report since September. He's been given updates for a year. Before that, there's a reason why he's been so active with Durham, but the fact that Lindsey Graham has scheduled a date, he will not just drop that report the morning of the hearing, as sometimes is done in the House. I think we'll get a full, complete look at it. It will be nearly 1,000 pages. And as I heard John Ratcliffe say, closer to 1,000 pages, and you don't do reports like this to give them a clean bill of health. That's not what's going on here.
These people have said, and Kimberly, my sources have repeatedly said, there'll be criminal referrals and that there will also be information and evidence that will shock the conscience and soul of the American people. What do your sources tell you?
Yeah.
Yeah, I've heard the same thing. I think it's going to be a mix of there are going to be some criminal referrals, and then there's also just going to be a lot of calling out of very bad behavior and rule breaking internally. People are going to be held to account, and I think that if you're talking about a report that is that big, that this isn't going to focus narrowly on just FISA court abuse, but it is going to go more broadly to a lot of different behavior. We know, for instance, that the Inspector General, from some of his prior reports, has been hugely concerned with leaks, for instance. So we'll see how far he gets, and then we'll see what John Durham, the attorney, then needs to mop up.
Is there any doubt, Jason Chaffetz, that premeditated fraud on a FISA court after multiple warnings that is not verified, we now know unverifiable, the basis, the bulk of information in the applications, that was used to spy, well, deny Carter Page's constitutional rights, spy on a candidate, a transition team, and a president? Is there any doubt that that has to be the conclusion based on what we already know to be fact?
You are correct, and you've talked about this for a long time, and you're spot on. We've also had John Ratcliffe and Trey Gowdy who have been able to look behind the scenes and seen the unredacted materials, and they've come as close as they could possibly come to saying that. I think what's interesting about this report and where it goes next is when it spreads out into other departments and agencies, perhaps the DNI, perhaps into the CIA. That's why Brennan and Clapper, I think, have been so vocal. I think they have a lot to worry about, and that's where I think Durham has to take over, because the Inspector General can only go within the Department of Justice, but Durham can go into any of those departments and agencies. And when the Attorney General himself says they used all tools at their disposal, that would include, as I would read it, legal and illegal, to go after this president and try to subvert him. This is going to be one of the biggest tests for the Department of Justice, if they can hold themselves accountable and those within, say, the CIA, the DNI, etc.
And again, outsourcing intelligence gathering, that would fit. We'll be watching. Thank you both.
It's not an impeachment drama. It's a comedy of constitutional errors. You know what I'd say? I'd say see you in court, or see you at the ballot box. Now that's real drama, the type that could bring down the House. Speaking of dramatic, Senator Lindsey Graham today announced that the DOJ Inspector General Mike Horowitz will testify in front of the Senate Judiciary Committee on December 11th, meaning his FISA abuse report is done and it'll be released soon. Joining me now, Congressman Chris Stewart of the House Intel Committee and Congressman Andy Biggs of House Judiciary. Congressman Stewart, let's start with you. What are you hearing about this report? It's going to come in any second.
Like many of us, we've been waiting. We've been told it was imminent, but we've been told it's imminent for going on several months now. But we really believe that it is close, and it clearly is going to be released before the December 11th deadline. And I so look forward to this. After the 3 years of work that we've done on the House Intelligence Committee, the revelations that we brought before the American people, and they're going to be verified now, and I fully expect there will be criminal referrals from this.
Don't you worry about getting your hopes up there on the criminal referrals? I'm always thinking for the Republicans, it's Lucy and the football. Y'all are Charlie Brown. I mean, I'm sorry, but every time we think, oh, we got him now. It's just kind of like the Democrats with Trump. Well, we got him now, but then they don't have Trump. Trump's smarter than they are.
Except for two things, Laura. One is this isn't Lucy. This is the Attorney General Barr, who is committed to getting to the truth and telling the American people. And I mean, God bless him. He's going to be key in saving our republic here. And the second thing is we know what some of these individuals did. And we know that some of it was criminal. And so that's why I'm confident in saying some people are going to be held accountable.
The Inspector General can only operate within the DOJ, though, and the FBI. People misunderstand what he is actually legally entitled to do. He can't go and run around the world and start interviewing Joseph Misfit. That's for John Durham. So won't he drop facts at the feet of John Durham to have to pursue beyond what he can do?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So he's limited And so we believe he's already given that information to Durham, and that's why Durham's been around the world conducting these interviews and looking for ways to resolve some of these issues. That's why I think Chris is exactly right. You're going to see some indictments probably come out of this, and for all we know, they might have already convened a...
But it doesn't come out of IG. It goes to Durham. Yeah. So Durham already pursuing the facts that have been developed by the IG, and we don't probably expect that Durham's report or conclusions are going to come out in the summer of next year. Don't you expect Durham's conclusions will come out long before this election season really is in its full swing?
To do this more of a drip and drab. So as he's ready to indict somebody, I would expect those to start coming out, and so you would see a series as opposed to a...
Well, that's what they did. Well, that's what that's what they did in the Russia thing. They got Manafort, and it goes on and on. All right, I want to talk about what Nancy Pelosi couldn't answer today when it came to impeachable conduct. Let's watch.
The Constitution defines an impeachable offense as treason, bribery, or high crimes and misdemeanors. What do you think applies to this case?
We are unfolding the facts. That's what an inquiry is about. There's not even a decision made to impeach the president.
You believe that?
Of course not. Of course not. I don't think there's a person in America who believes that. I don't think Nancy Pelosi herself...
Why is she saying that today?
Because it's necessary for her to say. She has to preserve this pretext of being unbiased and, well, let's look at the evidence and then we'll decide. She decided to impeach the day before this whistleblower account was released. And she said the president has betrayed his oath of office. She said the president has betrayed our national security. And regardless of her feelings, and by the way, I think she thinks it's a mistake. I think she's always felt that way. But regardless of her...
We've got 4 witnesses tomorrow. We've got 4 witnesses. You got Vindman. He's the one, everyone thinks he's a military guy, and he's an impressive array of medals on his chest, and it's impressive to see. So apparently a lot of people are going to think, well, no matter what he says, it's going to be, it's going to hurt Trump, and it's going to be, it's going to be good for the Democrats. But is it that simple? Because he had people are questioning his judgment in the transcript that was released yesterday.
Let me say, I look forward to questioning him maybe more than any other witness today. And as a former Air Force pilot, Air Force officer, I know that just because you're in the military doesn't mean you're beyond reproach or question. You have to be held accountable and responsible for the comments that you've made, and we think we'll be able to do that tomorrow.
Same ship, different day.
It's the drama that they've tried to whip up, and as you saw from the television ratings last week, not that that's everything, but it is an indication of what the public is taking in or not. What can we expect, do you think, tomorrow? We got Vindman, then we got Jennifer Hill in the vice president's office. She was listening in on the call. She expressed no concern, by the way, after the call wrapped. It wasn't until after the whistleblowers, the transcript came out, that anything was said by her.
Yeah, I think you're going to see continued declining ratings because this is just boring television. Nobody likes to watch it. I mean, even if I were at home, I would probably have it on mute. But Vindman himself has so many problems, as you know. I mean, whether you come in dressed with all the medals or not, the fact is he basically confesses that this is a policy issue for him and not that there was any legal wrongdoing on the part of the president. Now, if that's the case, then he's just another pawn in the deep state, isn't he?
Well, Fiona Hill expressed concern about his judgment as recounted in one of the transcripts.
As have others.
Right. Yeah.
As have others.
Yeah, and Laura, to think about the viewership, you can only cry wolf so many times, and eventually people will quit listening. They've been crying wolf for 3.5 years now, and I think we've just seen it. Eventually people quit listening.
I think if the president just ignored it, it's like, does a tree fall in the forest if nobody hears it? Like, I just don't think anyone cares about this. I wouldn't do a tweet-o-rama about it. I would ignore most of the noise and do the good stuff for the American people. Congressman, great seeing you tonight.
Is an injustice, a sham, a despicable, disgusting, repulsive, shit show.
how can we be against human trafficking, which is really another word for abetting prostitution, and yet decriminalize prostitution? Is the idea that women are prostitutes because they want to be, because they think it's like a great deal for women? What is the idea?
Well, you don't have to necessarily believe that. Some people do think that, and I think there's reasonable disagreement about the extent to which anybody is really free when they're selling their labor under capitalism. That's kind of a side issue. But what you can ask is the best way to do something about human trafficking to criminalize the people who are being trafficked and what they're doing, or do you want to go after it at a different level? And to me, it actually makes a great deal of sense to say, if you're the person being trafficked, we don't want to make your life worse. We'd like to help you, not threaten you with jail. We want to go after the people like, Epstein and, Trump and the Clintons and everybody else who are actually doing the trafficking. For the people like, Epstein and, Trump and the Clintons and everybody else who are actually doing the trafficking.
These people are sick.